Super Nintendo Controller. When Nintendo released the Super Nintendo in 1991, they changed how controllers would be designed forever. The SNES controller took the simple rectangle of the NES pad and gave it a rounded, ergonomic shape that actually felt comfortable to hold for long sessions. But the real innovation was in the button layout. Nintendo added two more face buttons, the X and Y, alongside A and B, arranged in a diamond pattern. This design became the template that nearly every controller since has copied. On top of that, the SNES introduced shoulder buttons L and R, which opened the door for more complex gameplay. Suddenly, developers had room to map extra moves, aiming, or camera control in ways that weren't possible before. Games like Super Metroid and Street Fighter II made full use of the expanded controls, and it felt revolutionary at the time. Players all agreed, this wasn't some ordinary controller, it was a blueprint. From PlayStation's DualShock to the Xbox controller, nearly every modern gamepad owes something to the SNES. It sold over 49 million systems worldwide, and a big reason people loved it so much was that the controller made gaming feel smoother and more natural than ever. GameCube controller. The GameCube controller, released in 2001, looked strange at first glance, but quickly became one of Nintendo's most beloved designs. The layout was unconventional, a giant green A button in the center, a smaller red B, and two kidney-shaped X and Y buttons around them. At first, it seemed odd, but in practice it was brilliantly intuitive. Your thumb naturally rested on A, with the other buttons arranged exactly where you need them. The analog triggers were another standout. They weren't just digital clicks, they had pressure sensitivity, allowing for more precise inputs. Racing games like F-Zero GX and shooters like Metroid Prime used them to full effect, giving players more control than ever. And the C-Stick, while small, introduced a second analog input, setting the stage for future camera and aiming control. Of course, the controller gained legendary status in one specific community, Super Smash Bros. Melee. Competitive players swore by its layout, precision, and comfort, and even today Nintendo still produces GameCube controllers just for Smash tournaments. It wasn't perfect, the D-pad was tiny and the button layout wasn't great for every genre, but for sheer comfort and innovation, the GameCube surpassed expectations. Over 20 years later, people are still plugging it in. Sega Genesis 6-button controller. By the mid-90s, fighting games were taking over arcades, and Sega realized the standard 3-button Genesis controller wasn't going to cut it anymore. In 1993, they released the 6-button version, and it instantly became the controller fans wished had been there from the start. Instead of A, B, and C being the only options, the new layout added X, Y, and Z right above them, creating two neat rows of 3. For games like Street Fighter II, this made a massive difference. Light, medium, and heavy attacks all mapped cleanly to their own buttons, just like the arcade. It wasn't just the button count that made it better. The controller itself was smaller, sleeker, and far more comfortable to hold than the chunky original. The D-pad was more responsive, the buttons had quicker travel, and the whole thing just felt faster in your hands. Hardcore players swore by it, and it became the go-to controller not just for fighters, but for action games that benefited from more inputs. While casual players may not remember it as vividly as Nintendo's pads, the 6-button Genesis controller was a quiet revolution. It proved Sega could innovate with hardware as much as software, and its influence lived on in arcade sticks and fighting game controllers for decades. What controller is at the top of your list? Let me know in the comments. Sega Saturn 3D controller. When Sega launched the Saturn's 3D controller in 1996, most players didn't realize just how far ahead of its time it really was. Shaped more like a round disc than a traditional pad, it introduced an analog stick years before most consoles fully embraced them. At a time when the PlayStation and N64 were still experimenting with 3D movement, Sega's controller showed how precise analog input could feel. It shipped alongside Nights into Dreams, a game designed specifically to show off the new control scheme. Flying through dreamlike levels felt smooth in a way that simply wasn't possible with a digital D-pad. And the controller didn't stop there. It also featured analog triggers, giving players subtle control over acceleration and pressure long before that became standard on the Dreamcast, Xbox, and beyond. The design itself was big and almost clunky compared to the sleek pads of today, but in terms of innovation, it punched way above its weight. Critics at the time noted its odd shape, but many acknowledged the possibilities it opened up. Looking back, the Saturn 3D controller feels less like a gimmick and more like a preview of the future. Without it, the controllers we take for granted today might have evolved a lot slower. Dreamcast Arcade Stick. By the late 90s, the arcade scene was still booming, and Sega wanted to bring that authentic experience into the living room. Enter the Dreamcast Arcade Stick, released in 1998. This controller was massive compared to the standard Dreamcast pad, but that was the point. It was built like the real thing. Featuring a full-size joystick and 6 large-faced buttons, it was modeled after the cabinets you'd find in arcades, and for fighting game fans, it was a dream come true. Games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Soul Calibur, and Street Fighter 3 felt completely different when played with the stick. The precise inputs, satisfying clicks of the joystick, and arcade-quality buttons made the Dreamcast one of the best systems for fighting games. Even though the console didn't last long on the market, this controller gained a reputation for its build quality and accuracy. It wasn't just fighters either. Shoot 'em ups, brawlers, and even classic arcade ports benefited from the stick's responsiveness. While casual players may have skipped it, hardcore fans still see it as one of the best official arcade sticks ever released for a home console. Today, collectors pay good money to get their hands on one, proof of the legacy it left behind. Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. When the Nintendo Switch launched in 2017, the Joy-Cons got most of the attention. They were innovative, detachable, and perfect for quick multiplayer. But for serious gaming sessions, they weren't exactly ideal. That's where the Switch Pro Controller came in, and it quickly earned a reputation as one of Nintendo's best designs ever. Right away, it felt premium. A traditional 2-stick layout, comfortable grips, and full-size buttons made it an instant upgrade over the smaller Joy-Cons. Battery life was another standout, lasting close to 40 hours on a single charge, far longer than what PlayStation and Xbox controllers were offering at the time. The motion controls and HD rumble features carried over from the Joy-Cons, but here they felt more precise thanks to the sturdier build. Critics praised the Pro Controller for combining modern features with a classic, reliable design. It pulled in strong reviews and became the go-to pad for games like Breath of the Wild, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Splatoon 2. While some fans complained about the high price and occasional D-pad drift, the overall consensus was clear. The Switch Pro Controller wasn't just a nice accessory, it was essential for anyone serious about playing on the system. DualShock 4. By the time Sony revealed the PlayStation 4 in 2013, the DualShock design was iconic, but it was also starting to feel outdated. The DualShock 4 changed that instantly. This controller wasn't just an upgrade, it was a complete reimagining. The grips were longer and more ergonomic, the triggers were bigger and more responsive, and the analog sticks had concave tops for better grip. It felt like Sony finally nailed comfort in a way the PS2 and PS3 pads never quite did. The DualShock 4 also brought in features that pushed it beyond being just a controller. The clickable touchpad in the center opened up new gameplay possibilities, even if not every developer used it. The light bar added flair and worked with the PlayStation camera for motion tracking, and the built-in speaker gave games a little extra layer of immersion, like hearing a reload click or radio chatter right in your hands. Critics and fans praised it, with many calling it Sony's best controller to date. It wasn't perfect, the battery life was shorter than people wanted, but it set a new standard for PlayStation. For most PS4 owners, the DualShock 4 became more than a controller, it was part of the console's identity. Xbox Elite Series 2. When Microsoft launched the Xbox Elite Series 2 controller in 2019, it wasn't just another accessory, it was a statement. This was a controller built for players who wanted absolute control over how they played. Everything about it screamed premium. The grips were textured and adjustable, and the sticks could be swapped out to match different playstyles. Even the tension on the analog sticks could be fine-tuned, something no other mainstream controller offered. The Elite Series 2 also came with back paddles, letting players remap extra inputs without ever taking their thumbs off the sticks. For competitive players, that was a huge deal. Add in Bluetooth support, USB-C charging, and a built-in rechargeable battery with up to 40 hours of life, and you had a pad that felt like it belonged in a class of its own. Critics praised it as one of the best controllers ever made, though they also pointed out its steep price. At around $180, it wasn't cheap, but for serious gamers, especially those in competitive shooters or esports, it was worth every penny. The Elite Series 2 showed how far a controller could evolve when cost wasn't the limiting factor. DualSense PS5. When Sony revealed the DualSense alongside the PlayStation 5 in 2020, it immediately felt like something different. This wasn't just the next iteration of the DualShock line, it was a full step forward in controller design. The shape was bulkier with longer grips that made it feel closer to an Xbox-style pad, but what really set it apart were the features. The adaptive triggers were the big innovation. Depending on the game, they could tighten, resist, or even pulse under your finger. Pulling back a bowstring in Horizon Forbidden West or firing a jammed gun in Returnal gave feedback you could actually feel. Combine that with advanced haptic feedback across the whole controller, and suddenly even walking on different surfaces felt distinct. Sand, water, and metal all had their own textures thanks to the vibration system. The DualSense also had a built-in microphone, improved speaker, and a USB-C rechargeable battery. The battery life was shorter than players hoped, but the leap in immersion was undeniable. The DualSense showed that even in 2020, when controllers seemed perfected, there was still room to surprise players. Arcade fight sticks. While not tied to a single console, arcade fight sticks have been a constant across gaming history, and for many players, they're the pinnacle of precision. Modeled after the cabinets of the 80s and 90s, these controllers bring that same joystick and button layout home. For fighting games especially, the difference is night and day. Inputs are sharper, combos are easier to pull off, and the satisfying click of a joystick feels authentic in a way no D-pad ever could. On consoles like the PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, Xbox 360, and beyond, fight sticks became essential for competitive players. Games like Street Fighter, Tekken, and Marvel vs. Capcom practically demanded them. Tournaments like EVO are filled with players hauling their custom sticks because the hardware can make or break a match at the highest level. They've never been mainstream in the same way as traditional gamepads, but that's part of the appeal. For those who use them, fight sticks represent a deeper connection to the arcade roots of gaming. They've stood the test of time, evolving with each console generation, and remain the controller of choice for some of the most dedicated gamers in the world. If you made it this far, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below for new videos daily.